Take a look at this photograph. It was taken from the window of a commercial flight in 2015, somewhere over the South China Sea. The pilot had just announced that the plane was entering Vietnamese airspace. But if you look down at the water, you will notice something strange. A thin strip of sand, a construction crane, a Chinese flag. In the middle of what is supposed to be international waters. That strip of sand is now a military runway. It has radar installations, it has missile batteries, and it sits on top of one of the most important shipping lanes on Earth, a lane that moves about $5 trillion in trade every single year. So how did China build an island chain in the middle of the ocean? Why does it matter if they did? And if someone wanted to block half of the world's traded goods from getting where they are going, could these islands actually do it? The story of how China started building islands started with a legal loophole. In 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea created something called the Exclusive Economic Zone. Basically, if a country can prove that a piece of rock above water belongs to them, they get control of the ocean for 200 miles in every direction. Not the water itself, but what is under it, the fish, the oil, the gas, and more importantly, the right to say who can build there and who cannot. Archival photograph from 1982 showing the unclassed signing ceremony, delegates in suits. China looked at this rule and saw an opportunity. The South China Sea is full of tiny rocks, reefs, and atolls. Most of them are uninhabited. Many of them are completely submerged at high tide. But if you could turn a submerged reef into a permanent island, legally, it might count as territory. And in 2014, China started doing exactly that. They sent dredging ships, massive ones, ships that could suck up thousands of tons of sand from the ocean floor and spray it onto a reef. In about 18 months, they turned 7 submerged reefs into man-made islands. And then they started building. To understand how fast this happened, you need to think about what these places looked like before. Fiery Cross Reef was a rock. It stuck out of the water at low tide. It had no fresh water, no soil, nothing that could sustain life. By 2015, it had a 2-mile runway, a harbor deep enough for warships, a lighthouse, a greenhouse, a basketball court, and buildings that looked like they came from a suburban office park. China dredged enough sand to fill 3,000 football fields, and they did it while telling the world that these were purely defensive installations, search and rescue stations, fishing support centers, meteorological outposts. But satellite imagery showed something else. Radar domes, aircraft hangars, missile shelters. And in 2016, China confirmed what everyone already suspected. They had deployed surface-to-air missiles to the islands. But here is the part that makes this genuinely fascinating. The islands themselves are not the weapon. The weapon is the water around them. The South China Sea is not just any body of water. It is the highway of global trade. About 1/3 of all global shipping passes through it. Oil from the Middle East to Japan and Korea. Electronics from China to Europe. Raw materials from Africa to Asia. If you control the South China Sea, you do not need to sink ships to hurt the global economy. You just need to make shipping companies nervous enough to take the long way around. And the long way around adds thousands of miles, which adds days, which adds cost, which gets passed on to everyone who buys anything. Come the 2020s, the concept of what these islands could do shifted again. And it shifted because of a different kind of geography. The first island chain. This is a real term that American military planners have used since the Cold War. It is a line of islands that stretches from Japan down through Taiwan, the Philippines, and into Malaysia and Indonesia. During the Cold War, this chain was seen as a wall that could contain Soviet influence. Today, it is seen as a wall that could contain China. But China looked at the same map and saw something else. If they could control the gaps in that chain, they could turn a defensive wall into an offensive gate. The South China Sea sits right in the middle of it, and by building artificial islands across the sea, China has effectively created a series of unsinkable aircraft carriers. Fixed positions that can monitor, track, and if necessary, challenge any ship or plane that passes through. Here is something that surprised me when I first learned it. The islands are not just military bases, they are legal claims. Under international law, a country has the right to establish an air defense identification zone around its territory. This is basically a bubble of airspace where that country can demand that foreign aircraft identify themselves. China established an ADIZ in the East China Sea in 2013. They have not formally declared one over the South China Sea yet. But if they do, those artificial islands become the legal foundation for it. They become reference points, coordinates, reasons. And once you have an ADIZ, you have a mechanism for turning a trade route into a regulated corridor. Declassified Pentagon briefing slide from 2020 showing potential Chinese ADIZ coverage over the South China Sea. Concentric circles radiating from artificial islands, red shaded areas, clean infographic style with muted military colors. Think about that for a second. You do not need to fire a missile to disrupt trade. You just need to require every commercial airliner to file a flight plan with your military. You do not need to blockade a port. You just need to inspect every container ship for environmental violations. The islands give you the legal and physical infrastructure to do both. Now, before you get too excited about the idea of a naval blockade, there is a very important thing to understand about how global shipping actually works. And it is something a lot of the headlines about this story get wrong. Shipping companies do not care about politics. They care about routes. And routes are determined by insurance. If an insurance company decides that a particular stretch of water is too risky, they will raise premiums. If premiums get high enough, shipping companies will reroute. They will go around the Philippines. They will go through the Lombok Strait. They will add time and fuel costs to avoid a zone where they might be delayed, inspected, or worse. That is how you block trade without firing a shot. Not with a naval fleet, with uncertainty, with risk. With the slow accumulation of rules and incidents that make one route more expensive than another. And the islands are perfect for this because they give China a permanent presence in the middle of the sea. A presence that can generate incidents. A Coast Guard ship that cuts across a tanker's bow. A fishing vessel that rams a trawler. A radio warning that tells a plane to change course. Each one is small, each one is deniable, but each one pushes up the risk premium. But the people caught in the middle of this are not the navies or the diplomats. They are the crews on those ships. Filipino fishermen who have fished these waters for generations and now find themselves chased away by Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Vietnamese oil rig workers who watch Chinese ships park next to their platforms for weeks at a time. We do not want trouble. We just want to fish where our fathers fished. But now there are big white ships with cannons. They tell us to leave. These are not military personnel. They are not making geopolitical calculations. They are just trying to work in waters that used to be open and are now contested. And their governments are in an impossible position. Protest too loudly, and you risk economic retaliation from China. Protest too quietly, and you effectively concede the territory. So what comes next? China's roadmap puts the full operational capability of these islands at a level where they can support sustained military operations anywhere in the South China Sea. That is not 5 years away. That is now. The runways are long enough for fighter jets. The harbors are deep enough for destroyers. The radar coverage overlaps. What to watch in the near term is whether China moves from asserting control to actually exercising it. Will they declare that formal air defense identification zone? Will they start requiring advance notification for military flights? Will they intercept commercial shipping for inspection? Each of these steps would be a test, a probe to see how the United States and its allies respond. And the response so far has been mixed. The U.S. conducts freedom of navigation operations. American warships sail past the islands to make a point, but they do not stop the construction. They do not reverse the land reclamation. They just sail through, make a statement, and leave. Which means that from China's perspective, the cost of building the islands has already been paid, and the cost of keeping them is manageable. The honest truth is that these islands have already changed the map. Not just the physical map, the political one. Before 2014, The South China Sea was a disputed area with competing claims. Today, it is an area where China has physical control of the most important locations. They have the runways, they have the harbors, they have the radar, and they have the patience to wait for the rest of the world to accept that reality. That is not a prediction. It is just the honest shape of where things stand. That is the full story of the Chinese island chain that could block 50% of global trade, and why naval strategists and shipping executives are paying very close attention. If you made it this far, drop a like on the video. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are curious about how the world actually works. Subscribe and hit the bell so you catch the next deep dive when it drops. And I want to know what you think. If you were running a shipping company, would you reroute around the South China Sea or take the risk? Let me know in the comments.